Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Well, the number of online privacy breaches and the questionable use of data continues to grow. Here to talk about it and its implications for you is Michelle Simard. She is a lawyer specializing in privacy and cybersecurity. Welcome to our program.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Tony.
I guess the first thing is maybe just state your general concerns about the state of kind of the online world and our privacy.
Well, in general, I would say we're in the wild, wild west because everything just moves so quickly. Regulation can never catch up. And not to say that necessarily regulation is the best route, because sometimes market forces also can dictate a really good way to get companies to be better at protecting people's privacy. But it's really the wild west, and regulation is catching up, but I don't think it's there yet. And with the pace of technology moving, and then of course you have bad actors, they move just at the same fastest rate also. So really what it comes down to is best practices.
So what do companies do when it comes to the data that they collect, and who's collecting that data, and basically what are the protections that are available right now?
Well, of course, it depends on jurisdiction, right? The EU has the GDPR, which is, a much more restrictive regulation, and so does California, where they have the Consumer Protection Act. And in Canada, we are in the process. We were going to have before the election, the federal election was called again. It's being revamped. It hasn't come out, but different jurisdictions have different requirements and rules.
Right.
Some are more restrictive, some are more lenient. But overall, there's a common theme: compliance with certain types of things of personal identifiable information, which is usually referred to as PII. And then there's PHI, which is personal health information, which is considered sacrosanct. And why? It's because bad actors really like to get a hold of it, because it goes for a lot of money on the deep dark web. Because insurance companies, many people have private insurance extended carriers. And if they have this personal health information, they may be able to access this, and they can get pharmaceutical drugs and then put it on the streets. So it ends up being another deeper, darker world. And that's why I say we're in the Wild West yet. We're not 100% there catching up.
Yeah, I think you've raised an interesting point that there is kind of nefarious criminal element use of our personal information, and then there's the vacuuming up of massive amounts of data about us that is used by corporations. Right? There's almost two issues here, not just one.
Yes, because before we had the internet and all these like great tools that can capture information so quickly, people normally, what they used to do, I don't know if you remember back in those days, where it's like, oh, you want to enter a contest or you want to free
Right.
something, you'd write your name on a piece of paper with your phone number, your address, and maybe somebody would call you up. And that was as far as it went. And maybe you'd have somebody who would do data input into a computer on a DOS computer. But that's as far as it went. Now it's like people are like, you got automatic things on your phone where people could just plug in the information, it's sent to them. And it's very easy to get data, and it's also very easy to hack. So because of the accessibility of how easy it is, it becomes more prevalent. And of course, bad actors are going to be bad actors. It just depends. What are you going to do? How are you going to steal? Are you going to steal cars? Or are you going to steal personal information?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really the talent skill that they have.
Yeah, indeed. No, that's a great way to put it. We've got just about a minute left, but I'd like to get started on a couple of egregious cases of privacy violations. The one that comes to mind immediately is BetMGM. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's an online betting company where people go in and they give in their personal information, which of course is necessary for a company like that, because the whole part of the process is that you have an account. When you have an account, you need to have certain personal identifiable information over there. So that's understandable why they're doing that. But the only problem is that the protections weren't there. Now, they only recently found out and declared with a statement in December 2022 that there was an actual indeed breach, but they realized that the breach was likely to be had in May 2022. So we're looking at a huge time delay here. And then furthermore, the hacker has gone online to say that he's going to sell all this information onto the deep dark web, which is pretty bad because there's about 8 different factors that he has to sell. And all of these things combined is extremely, extremely valuable.
Mm-hmm. And so that was just one case. We'll get to another case that I want to ask you about as well, but we're going to take a brief break. We'll be back after these messages. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here chatting with Michelle Simard. She is a privacy and cybersecurity expert and lawyer. Michelle, we're just going over some individual cases that our viewers may have heard about. Another one that also involves gamblers. I don't know whether that tells you something right there, but I believe there was a hack involving Casino Rama at one point.
Yeah, that was in 2016. I believe it was about 60,000 people's information was hacked to be stolen. And of course, within Ontario, we have the Ontario Lottery Gaming Corporation, which, oversees all these, they regulate all these businesses. So in that respect, that's just another example. As I always tell people, it doesn't matter what business it is, because municipalities are a huge target for a lot of hackers also, because they realize that, municipalities don't have as much funding as other types of governments, which means they have to put a whole bunch of resources out, and they don't necessarily have all the money to deal with privacy and cybersecurity. But going back to Casino Rama is the fact of, why do these things keep happening? And it's because technology keeps increasing, like we said in the first segment. And if companies don't keep up, then they're just going to be easy targets. They're just sitting ducks. And so really, it can't be an afterthought anymore. Privacy and cybersecurity has to be first and foremost with any type of budgeting that's done within a business and whatever they do. And further, I think that best practices need to be maintained better. We don't have a requirement within Canada to have a privacy officer in each company. Many companies do, but we don't. But perhaps maybe it would be a good regulation to have, because if you have someone who could be responsible for that and they have the authority to do so, then maybe business will be much more compliant.
Yeah, and it seems that businesses are getting that kind of advice now. Hopefully, they're taking. We'll talk. We'll get back to that in a second. But another issue that has come to light recently is the Ontario government's plan to digitize driver's licenses and health cards. Again, is this an area that could be of concern?
I don't think so. Just because, in theory, I don't think it would be. In practice, well, that's a different ballgame.
Right.
I mean, like everything in life, right? It really just does come down to how it's executed. And if the Ontario government can execute this well, then this will be a huge benefit for all of us. But if it isn't, so how it can be better? If you go onto the website, you'll see that they actually point out how it can be better, because a lot of the physical IDs weren't created with the thought in mind of somebody stealing it or stealing your identity, whereas this is being created with that exact thought in mind. A lot of people nowadays, especially when we had the pandemic where you couldn't go out, but people still had to do business, people would send a lot of their information through email. Email's not safe. It's not safe, especially if you're in a public Wi-Fi. And now, instead of maybe copying your ID, taking a photo of it and then emailing it to someone or a business, or let's say a job that you're applying to, now you have this digital ID that is hugely secured. And then now people can be protected and they don't have to worry about it being saved or someone handling it. And it also really comes down to accessibility and human error, really. Who's handling the information? I think that's the biggest thing that everybody needs to think about. But if they're saying what they're advocating is saying comes true, then I think it could be actually a benefit for many people. And the best part about it is it's voluntary, which I think is the most important. The most important thing about this program, that it's voluntary. It's not required, unlike the federal government, who's trying to initiate it where it's mandatory with our passports.
So tell us a little bit about the federal then. I wasn't even aware of that. What's going on there?
So the federal government, so as you know, maybe you've traveled lately or not traveled to the airport, but yeah, okay. So when you come into our customs and you land, you go through that kiosk, right? You put your little passport in there, and then there's a screenshot that takes a view of your photo.
Right.
you don't really have a choice in the matter. You got to accept it. Otherwise, you don't go through, right? That's just the way. You can make an objection, but then you're going to be spending another hour or so there. Who knows how longer? And most people don't want to do it. So we're unwillingly consenting.
Mm.
And what are they doing with this information? I don't know. So what the Liberal Trudeau government is saying is, well, we're going to collect everyone's facial IDs for recognition technology. So we call it FRT, right? And we're going to keep it in a database. So this way we can use it for future matters. Now, this is where I have a problem because there's no particulars about it. There's nothing about what it's going to cost us, who is going to be responsible for it. Like, these are a lot of
Right.
open-ended questions. And some people's arguments were like, well, we're already collecting this. I'm like, yeah, that's already a problem.
And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Michelle Simard. She is a corporate and commercial lawyer specializing in privacy and cybersecurity. Michelle, just off the break, we were talking a little bit about government plans on using facial recognition technology. And then there's been a case, I guess, that was the privacy commissioner for the country had an opinion on the RCMP using that technology. Maybe bring our audience up to date on that.
Yeah, so several years ago, the RCMP were obviously trying to find bad actors, not necessarily within cybersecurity, but just generally. And so, it is difficult. Canada's a big country. Travel has become much more easier and fluid and more affordable. So it's really hard. And so I don't know how it happened because the details of how it did happen weren't given, but I'd be interested because usually in a government organization, you'd have some form of procurement department. But nonetheless, there was an RCMP officer who used some technology from a company called Clearview AI, and they are a facial recognition technology company. And what they do is they scrape a whole bunch of images all over the net because at the net, it's a free for all. Like I said, we're still at the wild, wild west, and people put up their images all the time, Facebook, social media, all these things. So they scraped a whole bunch of them and they had this whole large database. RCMP used this data. They paid as a customer to use this database to see if they can find some bad actors. And at the end of the day, of course, that was a problem. It went to the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. At the time was obviously Daniel Therian. They did an investigation, and then they finally came up with the ruling in 2021. And the ruling is that the RCMP was in violation. And why they were in violation is because a government institution or body cannot use a third party that illegally collects images or information about people without consent in regards to privacy. Because the argument the RCMP made was, well, we didn't actually do it. The company did. We were just asking the company. We paid for it. And the privacy commissioner said no. To this day, the RCMP still states that they didn't do any error. So
Right.
now we have a juxtaposition where we have two different government bodies where one's advocating, I think what I did was right, and the other one who specializes in privacy saying, well, no, it's wrong. So I think, like I said, we're still the Wild West. It's very unclear what would constitute privacy and what's fair game and what's not fair game.
Indeed. Great example. So we've had a host of examples that we've talked about on this program already. Clearly, this issue is not going away. What can private citizens do to better protect themselves?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because you're right. This isn't going away. If anything, it's going to get worse before it gets better. But as you know, there's always a floor and a ceiling. So we haven't hit the floor yet. And I think when we do, that's when people are really, really going to be more vigilant. So right now it's like, well, it didn't happen to me, it doesn't affect me. So I'm just going to keep doing these silly practices. So best practices, as I mentioned before, for businesses and people, major things are, as in examples, research the company you're doing, read their privacy policies. I know it may seem like extra work, but it really does make a difference. If it's for small peanut stuff, then it doesn't matter. But when you're talking about giving personal information that your financials and somebody could take money from you or use your ID for something, I would actually read what their collection and privacy policies are. For an example, for MGM, because it's online gaming, I would suggest to many consumers, don't use your own credit card, use prepaid credit cards.
Right.
This way, there's only a certain amount, and they actually can't be stuck, because to go fight a bank saying this was unfair, this is not right, but they had all your personal information, it was hacked. I mean, this becomes a nightmare, and identity fraud is not easy. I recently just was referred to somebody where Rogers made a mistake with the SIM card, and the bad actor got somebody's SIM, and they got access to all their personal information and threatened them for $100,000 to pay them. Otherwise, they're going to release all their personal information on the net.
Wow. Wow. So
Yeah.
that's where it could lead without best practices, in other words.
Yeah, just research the company, check the privacy policies. Don't use your credit card if you don't have to, especially something like online gaming. Change your passwords periodically. Keep some good software on your computer. I know it costs a little bit of money, but at the end of the day, it's like getting insurance for your car. I
Yeah.
mean, you do it for your car, even though now it's mandatory in Ontario, but you would do it for many things. Why not do it for your computer? Just it's there's no price for peace of mind.
That's a really good point, Michelle, because really the evidence is in, and people. Hopefully, that's one of the reasons why we're talking about it on this program, so that people then, do a kind of a safety check of their life, and how much information is going out there, what the potential damage is if that information is acquired by bad actors. So we're going to continue this discussion with Michelle. We've got another segment coming up. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Michelle Simard. She is a corporate and commercial lawyer specializing in privacy and cybersecurity. Michelle, we've talked about a little bit about how consumers, citizens can better protect themselves from hacking and increase their cybersecurity. What should governments be doing in this kind of environment, do you think?
Well, governments need to be moving faster. That's one. And it's tough because it's such a grandiose infrastructure to kind of try to regulate. And like I said, prior to the federal election that happened, the government, the federal Liberals, they did have a game plan in place. Right now, they have another one where they're putting an act, but that has 3 acts within the act. And I personally find that is not good policy, because I think it's limiting, because it has to, as you know, you've been elected provincially and federally, all the steps it has to go through in government to pass. And of course, you're going to have different parties with different views so all we're doing is stagnation. It's
Right.
It's delayed. I would say let's get something nice, streamlined, let's get it out. We can amend it after the fact, but we need to catch up. So what should they be doing? Yes, sometimes you want these great grand things like the GDPR. But right now, in Canada's case, right, especially Ontario, because next to California, we're the next big tech hub, especially when it comes to things like AI and developing all these things. And if we want to have this, then we need to have some form of regulations that would be good that benefit people. Because at the end of the day, politicians are elected because they're supposed to represent people's interests. And if enough people complain, then you're going to get regulation. I'm still a big proponent of market forces. You don't like it, then another company comes in and says, well, I'll give you better protection and I'll give you a better deal, right? I still believe in that, but not everybody is well informed, and not everybody has accessibility as people who are much younger. So there is some need for regulation. So I think that they need to move faster. B, they need to incorporate more experts in it. They need to have more expert panels. And there needs to be more cooperation between the parties, as opposed to a liberal government, and then they have their team and they do it without any consultation, without anybody else. And
Gotcha.
I think if there was a little bit more camaraderie there, but the biggest things, of course, are mandating that companies that if you don't need, I mean, we already have a little bit of that, but I think it should be a little bit, we don't have much of an enforcement mechanism.
Gotcha.
So that's the problem. Even if a company by accident is not compliant, the enforcement, the consequences are not that high, which is something that Daniel Therian, Privacy Commissioner of Canada, was trying to say, that we need this within Canada. If the fines were large enough, companies would be much more compliant. So I think what we need to do is just have a bigger stick in order to get compliance to some of our regulations, and we need to spit those regulations out sooner and better. But most importantly, you don't need the info, then you get rid of it and delete it.
Gotcha.
You can't keep it. And you have to have mandatory training for all your employees, because most of the time, a lot of these problems happen, Tony, it's human error, and it's not even intentional human error. It's just, sometimes it's common sense. Sometimes you have somebody coming, changing a photocopier. Someone's got personal data on their screen. That person could be a bad actor who does this. For instance, when cars, when people use cars for traveling, they hook up their phone. They don't even realize that a lot of personal data is in there. And a lot of bad actors go to these rental car companies to be cleaners, and then they steal all the information.
Wow. Wow.
It's a low-paying job to clean some car, but they're getting high-value information from the cars. So that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Sometimes it's by accident where someone's working in a photocopier, but you never know who bad actors are and what they do. So it's all about best practices.
We've got less than a minute left, but let's talk a little bit about AI. Is that going to make the problem more complicated, do you think?
Well, that just depends on what companies are going to do. We hear Elon Musk talk all the time about these different aspects. I think AI can be extremely helpful. But at the end of the day, it really is about who are the people who are creating it. And Chat GPT, which you'll probably have an episode about that, because I think
Yep.
it's extremely important, especially for people, children in school. Hugely beneficial. That's something you see in Star Trek, where you say, "Computer, please go get me this and tell me this." It's amazing, but at the end of the day, it can be abused. So, like everything in life, we just need safeguards.
Exactly. Michelle Simard, it's been great having this conversation with you. Very interesting topics, and I want to thank you for being on my show.
No, thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks again to Michelle Simard for coming on the program. Very interesting topics on cybersecurity, some of the latest hacks that have gone on, and how you can protect yourself better given this crazy environment we're in. Thanks for watching today.